The elevator smelled like expensive ambition cedar and steel, and the faint ghost of someone's power lunch, and Claire Hayes stood in it holding a resume that had been revised 11 times in 4 days. She had counted the revisions the same way she counted everything precisely without sentimentality. 32 floors up. Shaw Industries occupied the entire crown of the Meridian Tower, and the city of Chicago sprawled beneath it like a kingdom that had never once asked permission to be magnificent. Claire had grown up in a two-bedroom apartment in Bridgeport where the pipes sang in winter, and her mother kept a jar of emergency cash taped behind the radiator. She had looked up at buildings like this one and felt nothing so simple as envy. She had felt curiosity. She had thought, who decides things up there, and how did they learn to? She was about to find out. The elevator opened onto a reception lobby of restraint and deliberate intimidation. Pale limestone floors, a single enormous desk of dark walnut track lighting that turned every surface into a quiet argument about taste. The receptionist, a young man in a precisely fitted charcoal suit, looked up with the professional warmth of someone trained to make visitors feel simultaneously welcomed and assessed. "Claire Hayes," she said, "I have a 10 o'clock with Human Resources." He checked his screen, nodded, and reached for the phone. Claire turned slightly to look at the wall behind her. Floor-to-ceiling glass, the city laid out in every direction, the lake, a gray-green mirror in the October morning. The view was extraordinary. She noticed it the way she noticed everything, methodically storing detail, and then she turned back to the desk. She was here because she was out of options that didn't involve her mother. The medical debt was $214,000. She had written the number on a piece of paper and folded it into her wallet, the way her mother had once kept emergency cash. She looked at it when she needed to remember why she was sitting in rooms that made her feel like a visitor in her own life. Her mother, Patricia Hayes, had been diagnosed with early-stage Parkinson's disease 14 months ago. The medications, the specialist appointments, the in-home aid 3 days a week, all of it added up to a slow, dignified catastrophe. Claire's previous salary as an executive assistant at a mid-sized marketing firm had been enough for ordinary life. It was not enough for this. The Shaw Industries posting had offered a salary almost double what she'd been earning. Senior executive assistant to the CEO, it said. Exceptional organizational skills required. Discretion non-negotiable. Candidates without a demonstrated record of operating under pressure need not apply. Claire had read that last line twice. Then she had updated her resume for the 11th time. The HR director, a brisk woman named Janet Cortez, conducted the first interview in a glass-walled conference room and spoke very quickly as if time were a resource she personally managed. She had asked Claire about crisis management, about confidentiality, about working with difficult personalities. Claire had answered each question with a specific example. She had not embellished. She had not performed enthusiasm. She had simply described accurately and without drama what she had done and why. Janet had looked at her over the rim of her reading glasses at the end of the 40-minute session. "You're not nervous," she said. It was not quite a question. "I'm focused," Claire said. "There's a difference." Janet had smiled for the first time. "You're our third-round candidate, Ms. Hayes. The final interview is with the executive team. If you pass that, Mr. Shaw conducts the last one himself." She paused. "I'll be candid with you. We've had 4 assistants in this role in 3 years. The job is extremely demanding." "I read that in the description," Claire said. "The description doesn't capture it." "What does it not capture?" Janet had studied her for a moment. "Mr. Shaw is particular. He has a very specific way of operating. He doesn't explain himself often. He requires someone who can anticipate, adapt, and stay completely professional under conditions that regularly cause intelligent people to lose their composure." "What kind of conditions?" "You'll understand if you reach the final interview," Janet said, and stood to close the meeting. That had been 2 weeks ago. Claire had passed the executive team interview. She had researched Shaw Industries for 9 hours across 3 evenings. Its founding story, its acquisition history, its board composition, its recent earnings reports, its philanthropy, its 3 pending litigation matters. And she had answered every question with the quiet specificity of someone who had already done the work. Now she was back for the final interview, and the receptionist was guiding her not toward a conference room but toward a set of heavy wooden doors at the far end of the lobby. "Mr. Shaw's office," he said. "He's expecting you." Claire smoothed her jacket once, folded the resume into her bag, walked forward. "Ma'am." The office was not what she'd expected. She had built a picture of it in her research corner suite, power furniture, the ritual aesthetics of billionaire arrival. What she found instead was a room that looked like it was being used for actual thinking. 2 walls of windows. Yes, the lake and the city in full display, but the desk was stacked with folders arranged in a system that was clearly personal and clearly functional. A whiteboard along the interior wall was covered in diagrams and notes in a dense, precise hand. Bookshelves floor to ceiling, and the books were not decorative. They had cracked spines and post-it tabs. A chess set on a low table near the window mid-game. Daniel Shaw stood with his back to her, looking at the whiteboard. He was taller than his photograph suggested, broader across the shoulders, with the particular stillness of someone who had learned to be economical with movement. His hair was dark with early silver at the temples. He wore no jacket, just a white button-down with the sleeves rolled to the elbows, and dark trousers, and the absence of the expected armor was either a test or a preference, possibly both. He did not turn when she entered. "Ms. Hayes," he said. His voice was low, unhurried, with a texture like something that had been refined by years of being listened to. "Sit down." There was a chair facing the desk. Claire sat. She folded her hands and looked at the whiteboard, which was close enough for her to read. A decision matrix. Acquisition targets in the Mid-Atlantic region with a set of weighted criteria down the left column. She was still studying it when he turned around. His eyes found her immediately, and they were a very particular shade of gray-blue, the color of the lake in October, precise and assessing. She noticed that he held his gaze slightly to the left of center, the way someone does when they are compensating, and that the lighting in the room was brighter than standard. She noticed both things the way she noticed everything, and she filed them without comment. "You've been reading my whiteboard," he said. "You left it visible," Claire said. "Most people look at their phones while they wait. Most people aren't interviewing to be your executive assistant." He studied her with an expression she couldn't fully parse, not quite amusement, not quite challenge, something in between. He sat down behind his desk. He did not open her file. "Tell me what you read," he said. "You're weighting location to hub distance more heavily than market penetration," Claire said. "I'm curious whether that's a distribution efficiency argument or whether there's a specific infrastructure consideration in the region." Silence. "Distribution efficiency," he said finally. "Primarily, though you're right that there's a secondary factor." He paused. "What else?" "The notation in the bottom left corner that's not a standard variable. You've circled it twice. Whatever it represents, you're not certain about it." His expression shifted by a fraction. It was the shift of a man who was not often surprised and was recalibrating. "Your previous employer," he said, changing direction. "You left voluntarily." "Yes? Why?" "The role stopped growing. I'd optimized everything I could optimize within the structure that existed. I had more capacity than the position used." That's a diplomatic answer. It's an accurate one. What's the undiplomatic version? Claire met his gaze directly. "The CEO relied on me for operational thinking and then presented that thinking as his own in board meetings. I don't object to doing invisible work. I object to invisible work being used to undermine the people doing it." Silence again, longer this time. "That's a significant accusation to make in a job interview," Daniel said. "It's not an accusation, it's a reason. You asked for the undiplomatic version." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he reached for a folder on his desk that she now realized was not her resume, but something else, a document several pages thick. "We conducted a background check before scheduling this interview," he said. "Standard procedure. But I had additional research done on the candidates who reached this round." He set the folder down without opening it. "I know about your mother's diagnosis. I know about the medical debt. I know why you need this salary." Claire felt something tighten across her sternum. She kept her expression level. "All right," she said. "I'm not telling you this to make you uncomfortable," he said. "I'm telling you because I want you to know that I'm aware of it, and that it does not affect my assessment of your qualifications." "Then why mention it?" "Because this role requires complete honesty between the person in your position and the person in mine," he said. "And I wanted you to know from the start that I already know one true thing about you that you might have chosen not to share, so that we're not pretending." It was, Claire thought, one of the stranger things anyone had ever said to her, and also strangely one of the most direct. "What do you want to know that's not in the background check?" she asked. Something moved across his face. She thought it might have been briefly respect. "Why do you want this job?" he said. "The real reason, not the version you rehearsed." I rehearsed several versions," Claire said. "The real one is simple. I need money. I need a lot of it steadily for a long time. I am very good at what I do. And I believe, based on everything I've researched about this company and this role, that this is the position where I can be most useful and be compensated accordingly." She paused. "I'm not going to pretend that wanting the salary is shameful. It's what makes me reliable. I have a reason to be excellent that isn't going to evaporate." Daniel Shaw looked at her for a very long time. "The last 4 people who sat in that chair," he said, "all had what I would describe as excessive enthusiasm for the position. 2 of them lasted less than 3 months. "Enthusiasm fades," Claire said. "Necessity doesn't." Another silence. Outside, the lake glittered. A cloud moved across the October sun, and the light in the room changed subtly, and Daniel Shaw's gaze shifted in a way that was too controlled to be natural. He adjusted something on his desk, a small, precise movement that took the folder out of the direct window light and brought it slightly closer to the bright track lighting overhead. There it was again. The same compensation she'd noticed before, the specific angle, the quality of the adjustment. She said nothing. He said, "You start Monday." She told her mother that evening over dinner in the small kitchen of her mother's apartment in Bridgeport, the apartment where Claire had grown up, which she now paid the rent on and visited 4 evenings a week. Patricia Hayes received the news the way she received everything since the diagnosis, with a careful, calibrated kind of joy that conserved energy and concentrated meaning. Her hands shook slightly around her tea mug. Her eyes, still bright brown, still sharp with the intelligence that had driven her to work 2 jobs for 16 years to keep her daughter in good schools, went warm and wet at the edges. "Executive assistant to the CEO," she said. "Daniel Shaw. You know him?" "I read," her mother said mildly. "It's going to be demanding," Claire said. "I might not be able to visit as often during the adjustment period." "Claire, I'm just being realistic about—" "Claire," her mother set down the mug. "You got the job. Stop managing the future and sit with me for 5 minutes." Claire sat. Her mother reached across the table and covered Claire's hand with her own. The hand that trembled. The hand Claire never mentioned trembling. The hand she pretended not to notice, because the pretending was a form of mercy they had agreed on without words. "Your father would have been so proud," her mother said. Claire looked at the table. Her father, Robert Hayes, had died when she was 12. A heart attack, sudden and total, on an ordinary Tuesday in March. He had been an orderly at a county hospital. He had been, by every measure that did not involve money, an exceptionally good man. "Tell me something about him," Claire said. She didn't know why she said it. She asked sometimes when the evenings felt like something needed to be marked. Her mother smiled. "He used to say that the most important thing a person could do was see someone clearly. Not the version they showed you, not the version that was convenient. The real person." She squeezed Claire's hand. He was very good at that. Claire squeezed back. She did not know yet that her father had once seen someone very clearly indeed, and that the consequences of that act of clarity were still rippling forward through time, and that one of them was sitting across from her tonight offering her tea. She arrived at Shaw Industries on Monday at 7:45, 15 minutes before her scheduled start, which was itself 45 minutes before the standard business day began. She had mapped the building over the weekend. She had learned the phone system and the calendar software and the company's internal communication protocols from the employee handbook Janet Cortez had sent. She had prepared 3 questions to ask Victoria Lane, the outgoing executive assistant who was staying for 2 weeks of transition. Victoria Lane met her at the elevator with an expression that Claire had learned to classify accurately. Not hostility exactly, but a very careful watchfulness. The woman was in her mid-40s, trim and precise, in a gray suit with the look of someone who had been competent for so long that competence had become identity. "Ms. Hayes," she said, "I'll show you to your desk." The desk outside Daniel Shaw's office was a command station in the proper sense. 2 large monitors, a dedicated phone console with 15 lines, a scheduling system that Claire could already see was color-coded in a way that encoded information she would need to decode. "The color system," Claire said. Victoria paused. "You noticed. Blue is internal. Red is external. The amber codes—" "The amber codes are mine," Victoria said. There was something in her voice that was not quite possessive. "I'll walk you through them this week." She did not say, "and then they'll be yours." She said mine. Claire filed that. "Of course," she said. The morning was a flood of orientation detail, and Claire absorbed it with methodical precision. She met the department heads whose schedules ran through Daniel Shaw's calendar. She learned the rhythms of the floor, the early meeting cluster, the midday quiet, the late afternoon acceleration. She watched Victoria move through the day with the economy of someone who had evolved to inhabit a specific ecological niche, and she noticed the moments when Victoria's eyes tracked to the closed office door with an expression that was hard to name. Not worry exactly. Vigilance. Daniel Shaw emerged from his office at 11 and handed Victoria a document without looking at her and said, "Meridian Acquisition Preliminary Term Sheet needs legal review by 3 and a summary on my desk by 4. He was already walking back toward his office. Then he stopped and turned slightly, as if he'd just remembered. "Ms. Hayes," he said, "how's orientation?" "Informative," Claire said. "Anything you need?" "The Internal Communications Archive. I'd like access to the last 18 months. A pause. "That's an unusual first-day request." "I like context," Claire said. "I can work without it, but I work better with it." He considered her for a moment. "Victoria will set up access," he said, and went back into his office. Victoria set up access. She did it quickly, efficiently, without comment. But Claire caught the look she gave the closed door as she typed and understood for the first time that there were layers to this office that she had not yet begun to map. The first revelation came on Wednesday. Claire had been working through the communications archive the way she worked through everything systematically, chronologically, noting patterns. She was not looking for anything specific. She was building a picture. That was what context meant, not a detail, but a shape. What she noticed first was a rhythm. Every 6 to 8 weeks, Daniel Shaw's schedule underwent a specific disruption. A morning of back-to-back external meetings that got cleared to internal only. A calendar block marked personal, that was otherwise absent from his schedule. A pattern of shorter communications on particular days that correlated with nothing she could identify in the business cycle. She was still thinking about this on Wednesday morning when Daniel came out of his office and walked past her desk toward the conference room and clipped the corner of the side table that held the decorative plant barely a graze. The plant didn't move, but Daniel's hand shot out to stabilize it with the reflexive certainty of someone who'd done it before, and Claire, who had been watching him from a precise angle, saw what she saw. He hadn't looked at the table. He hadn't seen it. He had walked a path he had memorized, and when the path deviated slightly because the cleaning team had moved the plant 2 inches to the left, his hand had found air and then found the table, and the correction had been so practiced and seamless that no one who wasn't watching for it would have noticed anything at all. Claire looked at her screen. She thought about this whiteboard angled out of the window glare, the elevated track lighting, the folder adjusted toward the bright track and away from the window, the specific quality of his gaze in the interview, that slight left-of-center alignment. She thought about the communications archive, the recurring disruptions, the calendar blocks marked personal. She thought about Janet Cortez's words, "Mr. Shaw is particular." She did not say anything. She did not look up from her screen as he passed. But that evening, sitting in her car in the parking garage before driving to her mother's apartment, she sat for 10 minutes with her hands in her lap and thought about what it meant to carry a secret that was also a vulnerability, and whether the man she worked for had any idea how visible he already was. Her father's voice, improbably in her memory, the most important thing a person could do was see someone clearly. She drove home. She said nothing. She returned the next morning with her file of context organized and her face perfectly composed. This, she thought, was her first test. Not of skill, of character. She passed it by doing nothing at all. Act 1 ends with a locked door. On Thursday afternoon, a man arrived in the lobby who was not on the schedule. He was handsome in the way that certain men are handsome when they have been told so repeatedly, with an easy confidence that had never quite been tested. Broad-shouldered, silver-templed, a smile deployed like a tool. He told the receptionist his name was Marcus Shaw and that he was expected. He was not expected. Claire had the schedule in front of her. She was on the phone when he arrived at her desk, and she held up one finger, polite, not dismissive, and finished the call before turning to him with the expression of someone who has not yet decided what to think. "Mr. Shaw," she said, "you're not on the calendar." "My brother doesn't always put me on the calendar," he said, with the smile that expected to work. "I'm family." "I understand. I'll let him know you're here." She picked up the phone. She called into the office. And she heard in the silence before Daniel answered the specific quality of a pause that was not surprise but something more controlled than surprise. "Your brother is in the lobby," she said. A silence. "Tell him I'm in a call. I'll be available in..." Another pause. 20 minutes. She relayed the message. Marcus Shaw sat in the waiting area with the ease of someone accustomed to the transaction of power, and he watched Claire in a way she did not find comfortable, not predatory exactly, but calculating. "You're new," he said. "I started Monday," she said. "Daniel said he'd hired someone. He didn't mention you were—" He seemed to consider his words, particularly sharp-looking. "Thank you," she said, returning to her screen. It was not a thank you of pleasure. It was the efficient closure of a conversational door. Marcus Shaw smiled to himself. He took out his phone. He typed something. After 20 minutes, exactly 20 minutes, not a second, more or less, Daniel Shaw's office door opened. The two brothers occupied the same office, and Claire, from her desk, watched them the way she watched everything, noting posture, timing, the frequency and nature of interruption. Marcus did most of the talking. Daniel listened with the particular stillness of someone who has heard most of what is being said before. At one point, Marcus's voice rose slightly, and Daniel's fell in response, which was an unusual inversion. 30 minutes later, Marcus emerged alone, buttoning his jacket. He paused at Claire's desk. "He works too hard," Marcus said. "Someone should make sure he takes breaks." "I'll manage his schedule," Claire said pleasantly. "I'm sure you will." He looked at her for a beat too long. "Welcome to Shaw Industries, Ms. Hayes." He left. Claire turned back to her screen and found a single internal message from Daniel Shaw sent during the meeting. 3 words. Review Q. 3 board minutes. She pulled up the Q3 board minutes. She read them carefully twice. She made 3 notes. She did not ask why. She never asked why. She simply looked. And what she saw in those minutes between one line of financial reporting and the next was the faint outline of something that had been almost but not quite concealed. A pattern of proxy votes, an abstention at a critical moment, a motion introduced by the board member listed as Marcus C. Shaw that had passed by the thinnest of margins. She made a 4th note. Outside, October deepened toward November, and the lake turned the color of iron, and somewhere in the building a clock ticked with the patience of things that are waiting to become visible. Act 2. What the light reveals. 3 weeks into the role, Claire had a system. Every morning she arrived at 7:30 and reviewed the day's schedule with the precision of a surgeon reviewing a procedure. She triaged communications by urgency and impact, not sender. She learned which of Daniel Shaw's department heads required hand-holding and which required information and which required simply to be heard for 4 minutes before they would act. She learned that the legal team responded best to written briefs, and the acquisitions team responded best to coffee and direct conversation, and the communications director, a nervous, talented woman named Priya, responded best to advance warning and a clear brief with no surprises. She learned Daniel Shaw, not the way she had initially feared she would have to learn him through trial and error and the particular indignity of getting things wrong in ways that couldn't be undone. She learned him the way she learned everything, by watching patterns, by testing hypotheses quietly, by building a model in her mind that she updated as new information arrived. He liked brevity. Not because he was impatient, but because he processed quickly and considered re-explanation an inefficiency. He did not like being asked questions that he had already provided the context to answer. He made decisions fast and did not second-guess them. But if you showed him a piece of information he hadn't had, he would update immediately and completely without ego. He was, she thought, the most intellectually honest person she had ever worked for, and simultaneously the most guarded. The two things were not contradictions. They were a system. He gave complete honesty in domains where he felt safe. In domains where he didn't, the door was very precisely closed. She did not push at the closed doors, she cataloged their locations. The vision issue was the most significant. She had confirmed her initial assessment multiple times now, always obliquely, always without drawing attention. The pattern was consistent. He oriented to light sources with specific intentionality. He positioned documents within a precise range on his desk. He had stopped walking the longer route through the east wing of the floor, the route with the more complex layout, and had shifted to the west wing corridor, which was straight and well lit and had no unexpected furniture. His driver, a quiet, loyal man named Robert, who had been with him for 7 years. Claire learned from the communications archive always positioned the car at a specific spot, not because Daniel had asked, because Robert had noticed. Victoria Lane had noticed too. Claire understood this now. The amber codes in the scheduling system that Victoria had called mine, they were not about ownership, they were about management. Every amber block corresponded to a situation that required specific environmental arrangement. A room with good overhead lighting, a position at the head of the conference table, where the light came from behind rather than from the side, a seating arrangement that reduced the need for long-distance visual identification. Victoria Lane had been protecting him. For how long, Claire didn't know yet. She took the amber codes and she learned them and she managed them without saying a word. And the first time she executed a complex external meeting setup, the board observer visit 12 people a venue, change. At 48 hours' notice, she reconfigured the amber elements without being asked and without explaining why, and the meeting went without incident, and Daniel Shaw met her at her desk afterward with an expression she was learning to recognize. "The Hartley room," he said. "The Lincoln room was unavailable. The Hartley has better overhead diffusion." A pause. Very controlled. "Yes," he said. "It does." Another pause. "Good judgment." "Thank you," she said, and returned to her work. Nothing more was said. But something had shifted, and they both knew it, and neither of them named it. The snowstorm that would change everything began as a weather advisory and became a Category 2 blizzard over the course of 18 hours. It was the second week of November, and Daniel Shaw had a meeting in Minneapolis, 2 days, a potential acquisition of a regional logistics firm called Northgate, worth approximately $340 million if the valuation held. The meeting had been in the calendar for 6 weeks. Claire had booked the hotel, the airport transfers, the dinner reservations, the backup restaurant in case the first was unavailable. She had also quietly booked 2 adjacent suites rather than 2 separate rooms because the original hotel had experienced a pipe issue on the 4th floor, where the standard executive rooms were located, and the suites on the 3rd floor had significantly better overhead lighting. Daniel had not asked her to come. She had arranged the logistics for one. She was deep in a contract review on the morning of departure when he appeared at her desk with his coat over his arm. "The storm is worse than forecast," he said. "The Minneapolis team has pushed the core negotiation to day 2. Day 1 is now a working session." He paused. "I need someone who can manage the documentation in real time." "I'll book a flight," Claire said. "I have a company plane. We leave in 2 hours. I'll need one more suite at the hotel." "Already done," he said. And then with the specific quality of someone who has checked their reaction time and is choosing to let information be visible, "You changed the hotel's suites. The 4th floor had—" "Yes," he said. "I know." He looked at her steadily. "I'll see you at the airport." He left. Claire sat for 10 seconds with her hands on the keyboard. Then she booked a flight and drafted the working session briefing and flagged Priya to manage internal communications for 2 days. She did not allow herself to think about what was happening between them in terms that felt personal. This was professional. This was her doing her job with excellence. This was the function she was paid for, which happened to require seeing something that the person she worked for would prefer remained unseen. She was very good at not overthinking. She was less good at it on the plane 2 hours later as the storm front moved east across Lake Superior and the jet bounced lightly through turbulence, and Daniel Shaw sat across the aisle working through documents with the focused economy she had come to associate with him. And she looked up from her laptop and caught him tilting a page toward the cabin light, and she felt something that was not quite pity and not quite protectiveness and was uncomfortably close to something she didn't have a name for. She looked back at her screen. He said without looking up, "You're thinking loudly." "I'm working," she said. "You stopped typing." "I was rereading." Silence. The jet leveled out of the turbulence. Outside the sky was the flat white of incoming weather. "The Northgate negotiation," he said still without looking up. "What's your read on the valuation?" "Their fixed asset portfolio is overreported by at least 12%, she said. "The maintenance backlog on the northern depots isn't reflected in the financials. I found 3 references in the due diligence materials that were vague in a specific way, the kind of vague that's usually a deliberate choice." He looked up then. 12% on a $340 million valuation, he said. "That's $40 million they're trying not to surface." He was quiet for a moment, and she saw in his expression something she recognized from the whiteboard, from the decision matrix, the pleasure of an accurate read confirmed. "I was at 30, he said. 12 is sharper. I'll walk you through my reasoning tonight if you want." "I want," he said. The storm hit Minneapolis at 6 in the evening, which was 2 hours after they landed, and by midnight the city was under 14 inches of snow, with more coming. The hotel lobby was warm and amber-lit and full of the particular energy of people who had been rerouted and were making the best of it, and Claire stood at the window of her suite and looked at the obliterated city and thought about her mother who was safe in Bridgeport with the overnight aid and about the Northgate valuation, and did not quite admit to herself that she was thinking about the man in the suite on the other side of the connecting wall. She had left the connecting door closed, obviously. At 10 o'clock, her phone rang. She answered it, expecting Daniel, and found instead a voice she didn't recognize. "Ms. Hayes," the voice said. It was a woman's voice, smooth and precise, with a specific quality of social confidence, the way certain women speak when they have been beautiful for a long time. "I'm Sophia Reed. I believe you know who I am." Claire did know. She had read enough of the background to have an accurate picture. Sophia Reed had been involved with Daniel Shaw for approximately 2 years, ending approximately 18 months ago. She appeared regularly in the social coverage that Claire didn't read closely, but skimmed for relevance. She sat on the board of 3 nonprofits that were adjacent to Shaw Industries' philanthropic work. "I know who you are," Claire said. "Good. Then you'll appreciate that I'm calling you directly because I thought it would be more efficient." A pause. "I've been trying to reach Daniel. He's not answering his personal phone. He's preparing for a negotiation." "Of course he is. He's always preparing for something." There was something in the warmth of her voice that Claire placed precisely the specific warmth of a person who has had intimacy with someone and uses the memory of it as currency. "I need you to pass along a message." "I'll be happy to let him know you called," Claire said. "You're welcome to leave a voicemail as well." A fractional pause. "You're protective of him. I'm his executive assistant." "Those aren't the same thing, Ms. Hayes, though sometimes people confuse them." The warmth took on a specific edge. "Tell him I've been speaking with Robert Chen. He'll know what that means." Claire made a note. "I'll pass that along." "I'm sure you will." The line clicked closed. Claire sat with the phone in her hand for a moment. Then she typed Robert Chen into the search field of the board registration database she had bookmarked 6 days ago. Robert Chen, independent investor. 3.2% stake in Shaw Industries, recently active in secondary market purchases. She cross-referenced the recent trading activity. The stake had been 2.1% 8 weeks ago. She thought about Marcus Shaw's proxy votes in the Q3 board minutes. She thought about Sophia Reed's voice with its specific edge. She knocked on the connecting door. Hot. Daniel opened it in shirt sleeves, reading glasses on which she had never seen before, and the reading glasses were slightly thicker than standard, and she filed this without expression. "Sophia Reed called my phone," she said. He was still for a moment. She said to tell you she's been speaking with Robert Chen." He took off the reading glasses. He set them on the desk. He turned to look at the window where the snow was still coming down in thick curtains. "Chen's been buying," he said. It wasn't a question. "He's at 3.2% as of last week." Daniel turned back to her. "How do you know that?" "I've been monitoring the board registration database since the Q3 minutes." Silence. "Since the Q3 minutes," he said. "Yes." He looked at her with an expression she couldn't immediately classify. It was not the assessing look of the interview, and it was not the precise satisfaction of the Northgate read, and it was not the controlled warmth of good judgment acknowledged. It was something more exposed than all of those. "You saw the Marcus votes," he said. "I saw a pattern. And you didn't say anything." "It wasn't my place to say anything." "It is now." She looked at him steadily. "Marcus is accumulating proxy support. Sophia is helping him. Chen is their mechanism for getting to board-level influence without triggering the ownership disclosure threshold. They're going to make a move in Q1, probably the February board meeting based on the proxy calendar." The silence that followed was different in quality from the others, denser with a different texture. "How long have you been working here?" he said. 3 weeks and 4 days. He sat down. It was the first time she had seen him sit down in anything other than a deliberate, controlled way. He sat the way someone sits when a weight has been added that they weren't prepared for. "Sophia and I—" He stopped. "You don't have to explain your personal history to me," Claire said. "I know I don't. I'm choosing to." He looked at the snow. "We were together for 2 years. I thought—" He stopped again. Started differently. "I missed things I should have seen." "We all have blind spots," Claire said, and then caught the specific resonance of the phrase and felt heat move through her and kept her face completely still. If he registered the echo, he didn't show it. "She knows about my—" He stopped for the 3rd time, and this stop was different. This was a door that had been almost opened. "She knows about your condition," Claire said quietly. The world stopped. He turned to look at her with an expression she had never seen on him, stripped of its usual calibration, raw, in a way that must have cost him something enormous. "How long?" he said. "Since your first week." You've known for 3 weeks. Yes. And you didn't? No. Silence. The snow came down outside, impartial and thorough. What is it? She said. I have hypotheses, but I'd rather know. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, retinitis pigmentosa. Progressive. I've lost peripheral vision completely. The central field is a pause that was a very precise calculation of how much to give. Narrowing. At what rate? My specialist believes I have between 1 and 3 years of functional central vision remaining. After that, he didn't finish the sentence. After that, you'll need to adapt, Claire said. He looked at her. She thought he had expected something else, sympathy perhaps, or shock, or the particular social discomfort that surrounds diminishment. The company, he said. If the board knew. If the market. Your cognitive capacity is unaffected, she said. Your judgment is unaffected. Your ability to lead this company is unaffected by a vision disorder unless you allow people to use it as a pretext for a different objective. Marcus wants the company. The vision is a lever he'd use. That's not about the vision, that's about him. He stared at her for a long moment. You're remarkably calm about this, he said. You're remarkably calm about this, she said. I'm following your lead. Something moved across his face in the amber light of the Minneapolis hotel suite. Something she would not name for a very long time. And outside the snow kept falling, and the city disappeared into white. Go get some sleep, he said finally. We have a $40 million negotiation in the morning. Yeah. Yes, we do, she said. She went back through the connecting door. She did not close it all the way. Neither of them addressed that. But the Northgate negotiation was 12 hours long and brutal, in the specific way that negotiations are brutal when the other party believes they have information advantage and the other party's representative has done homework that erases it. Claire managed the documentation in real time, flagging discrepancies, passing notes at precisely the right intervals, reading the room with the analytical calm that was. She now understood her primary professional gift. She watched Daniel Shaw work and understood several things she had not understood before, that the composure she had seen from a distance was not detachment but concentration, that he was most fully himself in rooms like this one, at a conference table in the middle of a problem with his clarity applied to something that required it. He didn't miss anything. Whatever his eyes couldn't gather easily, his mind compensated for. He listened with extraordinary precision. He remembered everything said in the room, reconstructed. It built it into his position in real time. He drove the Northgate team to a $290 million final offer, $50 million below their opening, by the simple mechanism of making their undisclosed liabilities undeniably visible. They signed at 6 in the evening. The snow outside had stopped. In the car back to the hotel, Daniel said nothing for several blocks. Then, thank you. The documentation management or the Robert Chen intelligence? Both. A pause. Neither, actually. Both of those are your job. She waited. For last night, he said. He seemed to consider his words with unusual care, for not treating the information as a weapon. I work for you, she said. Victoria worked for me, he said. She knew for 2 years. She never... He stopped. She also never told me she knew. How did you find out she knew? I figured it out eventually. The amber codes. He looked at the city, which was emerging from under its blanket of snow, white and bright and very clear. She was protecting me. I understood that. But it also felt... He paused again, and she had the sense of a man choosing language with the care of someone who doesn't often need to, like being managed rather than trusted. There's a difference, Claire said. Yes. A beat. You told me what you knew. It was relevant information. You needed to have it. You could have kept it as leverage. She looked at him. I don't work that way. He looked at her, and in the late November light of the Minneapolis evening, she saw the specific quality of someone who had been disappointed enough times to recognize the distinct sensation of not being disappointed. It looked on him almost like relief. I know, he said. That's what I'm thanking you for. The car moved through the cleared streets. In Claire's chest, something shifted that she would spend the next several days pretending had not. But they flew back to Chicago the next morning. The lake appeared below them as they descended, iron-colored in the November light, familiar and enormous. 3 things happened in the following week that would alter the shape of everything. First, Marcus Shaw called Daniel's office twice and was told both times that Daniel was unavailable. The third call, he asked for Claire directly. I'd like to schedule a lunch with my brother, he said. I'm told you manage his calendar. I do, Claire said. Mr. Shaw's schedule is quite full through the end of the month. I can find availability in early December. I'm sure you can find something sooner than that. The tone that expected to work. I'll check what's possible, Claire said. I'll be in touch. She did not find anything sooner. She found early December as stated. Second Sophia Reed appeared in person. She was extraordinary looking. The kind of face that photographs well and delivers in person, and she arrived at 4 on a Tuesday with a coffee from the cafe downstairs, which was not a coincidence, and she set the coffee on Claire's desk and smiled with the specific confidence of someone who has weaponized grace. I was in the building, she said, which they both knew was not true. I thought I'd drop by to see Daniel. He's in a call, Claire said. I'll let him know you came by. I'll wait, Sophia said and sat. She waited for 45 minutes. Daniel's call ended at 4:30, and when Claire relayed that Sophia was in the lobby, there was a pause that told her everything she needed to know about how he felt about the visit. Tell her I have a 3 o'clock that's running over. It's 4:30, Claire said. Tell her the 3 o'clock ran long. I'll tell her you're unavailable and ask if she'd like to schedule a formal meeting. Silence. Then, yes, do that. Sophia received the message without visible reaction and left the coffee on Claire's desk. When she had gone, Claire poured it down the sink. Third and most significant, Claire found the documents. She was not looking for them. She was organizing the storage archive, a task Victoria had deferred and Claire had inherited, and in the folder labeled External Legal Pre-Litigation, she found a set of correspondence that stopped her cold. The correspondence was between Marcus Shaw's private attorney and a shareholder activist group. It was dated 4 months ago. It detailed a set of claims, specifically a set of claims about the CEO's fitness to lead the company, which referenced in legally careful language a medical condition that affected his capacity. Someone had given Marcus the clinical language, the right phrases, the specific terminology that would make the claim credible in a board setting. Someone who had access to Daniel Shaw's medical history. Claire sat with the documents for a long time. She made careful copies. She organized them into a specific order. She considered several things simultaneously the way she did when a problem was multivariable and time-sensitive. Then she picked up the phone and called Janet Cortez in HR. I need a list of everyone who has had access to Mr. Shaw's personal records file in the last 2 years, she said. Janet paused. That's a confidential request. I understand. I'm asking on behalf of Mr. Shaw. I'll get authorization from him directly if you need it in writing, but I'd like the list today. Janet paused again longer. Then, I'll send it within the hour. The list arrived in 40 minutes. 11 people had accessed the file in the period. One name appeared twice in 2 distinct periods with no corresponding HR activity that would have required the second access. The name was Victoria Lane. Claire sat with that fact for a long time. She thought about the amber codes built with care. She thought about 2 years of protection of management of keeping the secret close. She thought about how people who love someone sometimes make choices that serve their love more than the person they love. She picked up the phone and called Victoria Lane's personal cell number. I know what you found, Victoria said before Claire could speak. A silence. Tell me, Claire said. Act 3. The cost of seeing. Victoria Lane met her at a coffee shop 2 blocks from the Meridian Tower at 7 in the morning before either of them had reason to be anywhere official. She looked older out of the office, or perhaps more accurately. She looked her age, a woman who had given 12 years of extraordinary competence to a role that had been by any fair measure more than a job. She wrapped her hands around a mug and looked at Claire with the eyes of someone preparing to be judged. Marcus came to me, she said, 14 months ago. He knew about the RP. I don't know how he found out Daniel's physician's office had a data breach. I found out later. Routine medical records. She paused. He came to me and said he had the records. He said he was going to use them at the board level unless I helped him. Helped him how? He wanted documentation, internal communications, evidence of decisions made under conditions of impaired judgment. She looked at her coffee. He said he wanted to protect the company. He said Daniel was a liability and the board deserved to know. And you believed that? No. The word was flat and immediate. I knew exactly what he was doing, but he also said. She stopped. Something crossed her face that was not easy to look at the expression of a person who knows they made a wrong choice and has been living inside that knowledge. He said if I helped him, he would ensure the transition was controlled, that Daniel would be protected. that there would be a settlement, a dignified exit, that no one would know the real reason. And instead I gave him what I thought was harmless, an internal memo from 8 months earlier that could be read as a judgment call under stress. And 2 weeks later, I found out he had already engaged the activist shareholder group. Victoria looked up. I realized I had been used. I stopped cooperating, but the memo was already out. You could have told Daniel. I know. Why didn't you? The silence that followed was the most complicated silence Claire had encountered in several weeks of complicated silences. Because I thought... Victoria stopped. Because telling him would have meant admitting what I'd done. And I had spent 12 years keeping that secret precisely because I couldn't stand the thought of him looking at me the way... She stopped again. He trusted me. He still does, Claire said, which was she recognized possibly not true anymore. He described what you built as a form of protection. Victoria closed her eyes briefly. I know what I built. I also know what I gave away. What did the memo say? It was about the Carver acquisition, 2 years ago. Daniel made a call that the board later questioned, an aggressive bid that came within 8% of a competing offer. The memo documented the deliberation, including a note that he had reviewed the materials with reduced visual assistance that day. She met Claire's eyes. I wrote the memo myself. It was accurate, but in context without explanation it reads as impaired judgment. Where is the memo now? Marcus has it, his attorney has it. And the shareholder group? I don't know exactly. Probably. Claire sat with this. She thought about the board meeting in February. She thought about Daniel in the Minneapolis hotel suite with the specific nakedness of someone who has finally let a wall come down. She thought about $30 million in valuation and a progressive disease and a man who had built everything he had from nothing and was watching something he could not control move toward him. I need you to make a statement, Claire said, in writing. Everything you just told me, including Marcus's approach and your initial cooperation and when and why you stopped. I need it legally accurate and complete. Victoria was quiet. That statement would expose me. Yes, Claire said. To Daniel? Yes. Another silence. I'll write it, Victoria said. Today. She looked at Claire with an expression that was finally and cleanly nothing but tired. Take care of him. He doesn't... She stopped. He doesn't always see what's right in front of him. No, Claire said. Neither do most of us. She left Victoria with the coffee and walked back to the tower in the December cold, with her breath making small white clouds, and her mind working through the sequence of what needed to happen and in what order and with what documentation, and she did not let herself think about the fear that was at the edge of everything, the fear of being wrong, of mishandling it, of destroying trust. She had spent weeks building by moving too fast. She also did not let herself think about what she felt for the man she was moving to protect. Not yet. She told him that afternoon. Not all of it at once. She had learned his processing style, which was sequential and logical, and did not benefit from information piling. She told him about the shareholder group first, walking him through the documentation she had found in the archive. She told him about the proxy vote pattern and Robert Chen's stake, which had grown again 3.6% as of yesterday's filing. She put the documents in order on his desk in the order that built the narrative correctly, like chapters. He was very still throughout. When she reached the Victoria section, she paused. He was looking at the documents, or looking at the position on the desk where the documents were, which in the good overhead light was sufficiently accurate, and his stillness had changed quality. It was no longer the stillness of analysis. It was the stillness of something hitting. Victoria gave him the Carver memo, he said. Yes, she wrote that memo. Yes, he stopped. She accessed my medical file. She accessed it twice. The first access was routine. The second was 14 months ago, shortly before I think Marcus approached her. A long silence. Outside the window, the December lake was slate and cold and enormous. She was protecting me, he said, slowly, like something being laid down. She thought she was. She wasn't. No, Claire said. She wasn't. But she stopped when she understood that, and she wrote the statement. She slid the last document across the desk. She'd like you to know that she is sorry. He looked at the paper for a very long time without reading it. Then he picked it up and held it at the specific angle that worked for him and read it in complete silence. All right, he said when he was done. He set the paper down. He looked at the window. All right, are you... Give me a minute, he said. She gave him 3. She sat across from him in the chair where she had sat on interview day, and she looked at the city below and let him have the silence. When she heard him exhale slow and controlled, she turned back. "What do we need to do?" he said. "Legal first. I'd recommend David Kim. He's the outside counsel who has the most board experience in this company. The statement from Victoria is enough to shift the evidentiary weight in any board challenge based on the Carver memo. But we need to get ahead of February, which means December. The annual review is December 16th, which gives us 13 days to build a position." She paused. "There's one more thing." "Say it." "Sophia's been meeting with Robert Chen. I don't have documentation of the content, but the timing tracks with the stake increases. I think she's involved in the proxy strategy, not just peripherally." He was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice had the specific, careful quality of a man being precise about something that is also painful. "Sophia knows about the RP," he said. "She knew before we ended. He stopped. "She said it didn't matter to her. At the time." "People say things at the time," Claire said carefully. "Yes." He was looking at the window again. "I spent 2 years believing she meant it. She did not say I know what that feels like." She was not professionally or personally in a place where that was appropriate to say, but she thought it in the way you think things that recognize themselves. "Daniel," she said, and it was the first time she had used his name without the professional prefix, and she heard it happen and could not take it back and did not try to. "This company is still yours. Everything they're using against you is contingent on you being unable to defend yourself. You can defend yourself. That's what we're going to do." He turned back from the window. He looked at her with the particular precision of someone who is trying to see something accurately and is determined to get it right. "Why are you doing this?" he said. "Because it's my job." "No," he said. "I mean, why are you doing it like this? The way you're doing it." She held his gaze. "Because you deserve someone who sees the full picture and acts accordingly." Silence. "My father used to say that," he said. "Almost exactly." Something moved across his face, a ghost of something old. "He died when I was 19. He used to say the most important thing was to see people clearly." Her father's voice in her memory from her mother's kitchen. She did not say my father said the same thing. She said, "Then let's make sure everyone sees you clearly." He held her gaze for a beat longer than was strictly necessary. Then he reached for the phone and called David Kim. The 13 days before the annual review were the most relentless of Claire's professional life. She ran the operations of the CEO's office with one hand and built a legal and strategic defense package with the other. And she slept 5 hours a night and drove to her mother's apartment on Sunday evening and sat in the warm kitchen while Patricia made soup and asked questions that Claire answered carefully and selectively because her mother was not well and did not need the weight of this. But her mother, who had worked 2 jobs for 16 years and raised a daughter on clarity and nerve, was not easily managed. "You're exhausted," she said. "I'm busy." "Is it the job or the person?" Claire looked at her soup. "The job." Her mother smiled with the infuriating accuracy of a woman who has been paying close attention for 29 years. "You can tell me when you're ready," she said. "There's nothing to tell." "All right." They ate in companionable quiet. Patricia's hands shook slightly around her spoon. Claire noticed and said nothing. "Tell me about him," her mother said, as if the subject had not been closed. "I just said," "the CEO. Tell me about the company. Tell me something." Claire told her about the Northgate negotiation. She told her about the December timeline and the acquisition landscape and the quarterly numbers that had come in strong despite the headwinds. She did not tell her about Marcus or Sophia or Victoria or the February board meeting. Her mother listened with her bright brown eyes and her shaking hands and her precise, still sharp attention. "Is he a good man?" she said when Claire was done. A pause. "Yes," Claire said. "I think he is." "Then make sure he knows you think so," her mother said. "Good men sometimes can't see it in themselves." The annual review was on a Monday in the boardroom on the 32nd floor with 12 board members and the executive team, and a tension that everyone in the room could feel and that several of them were pretending not to. Marcus Shaw arrived in a dark suit with the confidence of someone who has arranged the furniture in advance. He had not arranged this furniture. Claire had been in his boardroom at 6 that morning, reconfiguring the seating assignment for Daniel's position, moving his chair to the head of the table, precisely centered below the main overhead panel with the screen behind him. This was not unusual. The CEO always sat at the head. But the specific positioning had been calibrated. She sat against the wall with a laptop and a legal pad and watched the room fill. Sophia Reed was not in the room. She had no formal board standing, but her influence was visible in the way two of the independent directors, both recent additions, both connected to investor networks, where Robert Chen also appeared, arranged their portfolios with a particular attention. Marcus opened with a review of Q3 performance, which was unimpeachable. Shaw Industries had had a strong year. The Northgate acquisition added value. The balance sheet was clean. He moved through these facts with the efficiency of someone moving past them. Then he pivoted. "There's an operational matter I'd like to raise under new business," Marcus said smoothly, "related to executive leadership continuity." Daniel at the head of the table was very still. "I think the board would benefit from a candid discussion about long-term succession planning," Marcus continued. "Not as a crisis measure, but as good governance, in light of some concerns that have been shared with board members in recent weeks." He paused. He did not look at Daniel. He looked at the two independent directors. "What concerns?" one of them said on cue. "I'd prefer to discuss them formally." "I have a document to enter into the record," Daniel said. Marcus paused. He did not quite succeed in masking the pause. David Kim stood at the side of the room and passed copies of a document to the board secretary, who distributed them. Claire watched each board member's face as they received it. "This is a legal statement from Victoria Lane," Daniel said, "who served as my executive assistant for 12 years. It documents an approach made to her 14 months ago by a board member who shall remain unnamed until legal proceedings are complete, in which she was pressured to provide internal documentation to an external shareholder activist group. It also documents her subsequent non-cooperation with that approach and the circumstances of the relevant data breach. David Kim will summarize the legal implications." Marcus Shaw's face was very composed. The composition was the most telling thing about it. David Kim summarized the legal implications. He was clear, organized, and exact. The two independent directors were less comfortable than they had been 3 minutes ago. "I'd also like to note," Daniel said into the silence that followed, "that the acquisition strategy, which has been characterized privately as resulting from impaired judgment, has added $290 million in valuation since November. The full due diligence materials are available on request." Another silence. Marcus spoke. His voice was still smooth, still controlled, but there was something underneath it now that had not been there before, the specific texture of a plan. Meeting an obstacle it had not anticipated. "Daniel," he said, "this is a board meeting," Daniel said. "Let's keep it to governance matters." He paused. "Unless you have something specific to raise." Marcus did not raise it. He could not. The Carver memo was worthless without Victoria's corroboration, and Victoria's corroboration now existed in a legal document that pointed in the opposite direction. The proxy strategy remained, but it had lost its anchor. The meeting continued for another 90 minutes on its formal agenda and resolved with a unanimous vote of confidence in executive leadership that Marcus Shaw participated in, because not participating would have been more revealing than any statement he could have made. When the room cleared, Daniel remained at the head of the table. Claire began gathering her materials. "That was well done," he said. "David Kim was excellent," she said. "I mean what you built," he said. "The Victoria statement, the documentation sequence, the timing. You made the call in the room, with the exact information I needed in the exact order I needed it." He paused. "You know what you did." She looked up at him. The boardroom light was good, the overhead panel she had centered him under, and she could see his expression clearly. It was the expression of someone who is not accustomed to being fully seen and is discovering that it does not feel the way they had feared. "I did my job," she said. "Claire," he said, her name in his voice. She waited. "Thank you," he said. "Just that." She held his gaze for a moment. Something moved between them that was the accumulated weight of 13 days and a snowstorm and a secret and a truth and a document laid on a desk in the right order. She said very carefully, "You're welcome." She went back to her desk. She sat for a moment looking at nothing. She thought about her mother's question, "Is he a good man?" and her own answer and what the answer meant. Then she thought about Robert Chen's stake, which was still 3.6%, and Sophia Reed, who had not been in the boardroom but was not gone. The board meeting was over. The fight was not. Act 4. The thing that costs everything. The call came from Sophia at 8 in the morning, 2 days after the board meeting, and this time she called Daniel's direct line. Claire heard his voice through the open office door. The door that had been increasingly left open, and she was not trying to overhear, but she was not hearing either. "Sophia." A pause. "No." A longer pause. I understand what you're saying, and I'm going to tell you what I'm going to do about it. His voice was steady and final, in a way that she had not heard him use with his brother or with the board, a specifically personal kind of finality. Nothing. I'm going to do nothing because there is nothing to do. Whatever arrangement you had with Marcus. Another pause during which she imagined Sophia speaking, explaining, probably not quite apologizing. No. No, I'm not interested in the reason. The last pause. Don't call this number again. The line clicked. A silence. Claire did not look up from her screen. Daniel appeared in his doorway. I need coffee, he said. She stood and went to the small kitchen adjacent to the executive floor. She made coffee the way he took it, strong. No sugar from the good beans, not the pod machine, and carried it back and set it on his desk. Sophia has been working with Marcus since last spring, he said. He was not telling her something she didn't know. She understood saying it out loud because saying it out loud was different from knowing it. Yes, she said. She appeared to want reconciliation, several times. He looked at the coffee. I was never going to reconcile, but He stopped. I let her believe I might be open to it, which was its own kind of dishonesty. You didn't want to close the door completely because I was lonely, he said. And the directness of it was startling and immediately resolute, the kind of statement a man makes when he has decided to stop being oblique about the truth. Which is an embarrassing thing to admit, and also the accurate thing, and you've established that you prefer accuracy. Claire sat down in the chair across from his desk. She had not been invited to sit. She sat anyway because the conversation was no longer operating in a register where invitation was the relevant framework. Lonely despite what she said. He looked at her. You have a company. A brother, complicated as he is, resources, the ability to build and sustain things. What is the lonely despite? He was quiet for a long moment. Despite all of it, he said. The things you list, they're true, but they don't. He picked up the coffee, set it down without drinking it. When I was 22, I had almost nothing. I was working 3 jobs and trying to build the first version of what this became. And I was failing in very specific ways, and there was a period of about 6 months where I thought the whole thing would collapse. He paused. I met a man, an orderly at the county hospital, where I'd gone with a hand injury. I'd been doing construction work on weekends for extra money. He sat with me in the waiting room for 2 hours because I had come in alone, and he could see He stopped. He could see I was not all right. Something very still happened in Claire's chest. He didn't do anything dramatic, Daniel continued. He talked to me. He asked what I was trying to build. He listened. Actually listened, the kind of listening that reorganizes what you're saying while you say it. And at the end of it, he said, you have more than you think you have. And then he said, he paused. And then he stopped. What did he say? Claire asked. Very quietly. Daniel looked at her with the specific quality of someone who is on the edge of something enormous and has not yet decided to step off. He said the most important thing a person can do is see someone clearly. The room was absolutely silent. Claire sat with the words inside her, which were her father's words, which she had heard in her mother's kitchen 3 weeks ago, which she had heard her whole childhood at a dinner table that always had too much warmth for its modest size. Claire, Daniel said. He was reading her face, which had changed in a way she had not controlled. What is it? His name, she said. Her voice came out steady, which was a significant achievement. The man in the hospital. I never got his full name. Robert, he said. He worked there. Robert Hayes, she said. The silence that followed was the longest of all the silences. My father, she said. He was an orderly at County General his entire career. He died when I was 12, of a heart attack, on a Tuesday in March. She stopped. Started again. He used to say that, the seeing clearly thing. My mother told me last month it was one of his. Her voice caught once and she steadied it. It was his thing. Daniel Shaw was very still. Robert Hayes, he said. Yes. He looked at her with an expression she had never seen on him or on anyone. The expression of someone receiving a gift they did not expect and do not know yet what to do with. And also the expression of someone who understands suddenly the scale of what they have been given. He saved me, he said, not dramatically. He sat with me for 2 hours in a hospital waiting room and listened to me and said the right things at the right moment. And I went back the next day and I worked differently. I thought about his voice every time I wanted to quit, for 6 years. His voice was something I had not heard from him before, rough at the edges, undefended. This company exists because of those 2 hours. Claire looked at her hands. He never knew, she said. He wasn't that kind of person. He would have just been helping someone in a waiting room. She looked up. He would have gone home and had dinner and not mentioned it. No, Daniel said. He wouldn't have. They looked at each other across the desk in the gray December light. I've been trying to find him for years, Daniel said. I didn't have a last name. I went back to the hospital twice. He stopped. I wanted to. Another stop. I didn't know what I wanted. To say thank you, to say that it mattered, to say that something he did without thinking about it made everything that came after possible. Claire was not crying. She was not going to cry in this office, which was a decision she enforced with the entire weight of her professional identity. But she felt the thing that happens behind the eyes when something immeasurably significant is being processed, and she let it happen there contained. He would have been, she said. Her voice was careful. He would have been so glad to know. Tell me about him, Daniel said, softly. Please. She told him. She told him about the 2-bedroom apartment in Bridgeport and the jar of emergency cash and the 2 jobs her mother worked after he died. She told him about the way he could listen, the specific reorganizing quality of it, and the way he came home from the hospital smelling like antiseptic and still managed to make dinner feel like an occasion. She told him about the Tuesday in March, which she remembered with the crystalline, terrible accuracy of childhood trauma, the phone call, her mother's voice changing the way the afternoon light looked in the kitchen. She told him about the decision she had made at 12 years old to be his daughter, in the way that counted to be excellent, to be clear-eyed, to take care of the people in her immediate range. He listened with the full-body attention that she now understood was in him a form of reverence. When she finished, the room held the particular quality of a space where something true has been said. I owe him everything, Daniel said. He didn't want to be owed, Claire said. He just wanted to help. I know. He looked at her for a long time. I see that in you. He paused. I have from the beginning. That quality. I couldn't identify it. She looked at the window. The December sky was the same color as the lake, flat silver, full of something that hadn't decided yet whether to fall. She started. Stay, he said. She looked at him. I'm not. He made a visible effort to be precise. I'm not asking as your employer. I'm aware that this conversation has moved well outside that register. I'm asking because. He paused. Because I haven't told anyone about Robert Hayes in 22 years. Because this room feels like the first conversation I've had in a long time that is completely unmanaged. He held her gaze. And I don't want it to end yet. She stayed. They talked for another hour. About her father. About his early years, which were rougher than the polished founding myth. The eviction notices, the failed pitches, the partnership that had fallen apart badly. About her mother's diagnosis and the specific particular challenge of watching someone bright and capable experience diminishment. About his vision, not as a crisis, but as a reality, the way it changed things, and the ways he had adapted, and the things he grieved. He talked about what it was like to grieve things while they were still present. It's the anticipatory version, he said, watching something that you love change while it's still yours, knowing what's coming. My mother, she said quietly. Yes, he said, not exactly, but adjacently. How do you, she considered her words, how do you stay functional in the grief of it? He was quiet. I work, he said. I know that's not the most sophisticated answer. It's an honest one. I also, he paused for longer. I hold on to the things that are still there, the central field, toward which I orient. He looked at her. Increasingly, the central field has contained very good things. The sentence was specific and not about vision, and they both knew it, and neither of them said so, and the December light shifted outside the window, and the city went on being the city. Robert Chen sold his shares a week later. The sale was documented in the evening filing, and Claire saw it at 7:15 a.m. and had it on Daniel's desk in a brief summary by 7:30. The stake 3.6% accumulated over 4 months was sold in a single block, which meant someone had made him a compelling offer, which meant the proxy strategy had been dismantled from the other end. She did not know immediately how. She found out by noon when David Kim called. Sophia Reed has liquidated her position in the associated holding structure, David said. She also withdrew from the 2 nonprofit board seats adjacent to Shaw's philanthropic operations. A pause. I don't have visibility into why. Claire did not have visibility either, but she thought about the phone call. Don't call this number again, and the specific finality of it, and she thought that Sophia Reed was a woman who assessed situations accurately and had concluded correctly that this one was no longer favorable. She also thought Robert Chen didn't sell because someone made him a good offer. He sold because someone made clear to him one way or another that the exit price of staying was going to exceed the exit price of selling. She thought about Marcus Shaw, who had been quietly present in the building twice since the board meeting, both times on the lower floors, both times unannounced. She drafted a memo. She ran it by David Kim. She had it on Daniel's desk by 2. Daniel read it and looked up. You think Marcus is repositioning? I think Marcus is a man who knows when a direction has stopped working, Claire said. He'll find another angle, or he'll accept the situation. Is that consistent with your read of him? A pause. No, Daniel said. Then we stay prepared. He nodded slowly. He was looking at her with the specific expression she had been cataloging for 2 months now, the one that had started as assessment and had become something else by increments so gradual she could not identify when each shift had occurred. Claire, he said. Yes, I need to tell you something that isn't related to the company. She waited. He stopped. For the first time in their acquaintance, he seemed not to have the words already arranged. I have been another stop. I'm not very good at this, he said. You're doing fine, she said, which was the exact thing he had never said to her, but which she now understood been listening for. I have been thinking about you, he said, not as my assistant, as... He seemed to commit to something. As a person, I would like to know better. And I am aware that this is a complicated thing to say from the chair I sit in, and I am not asking you to respond immediately or to respond in any particular way. I'm telling you because... He looked at her steadily. Because I have learned in the last 2 months that being clear is better than being safe. The December light was coming through the windows at a low angle, the solstice close. It caught the silver in his temples. It made the room feel smaller and more significant than its square footage. I'm not going to respond immediately, she said. I know, but She held his gaze, not unaware of what you're describing. Something moved in his expression that was the closest she had seen to uncomplicated happiness. All right, he said. All right, she said. She went back to her desk. She sat very still for approximately 30 seconds. Then she picked up the phone and called the Northgate closing document team and returned to work. But her hands were not quite steady, and she did not mind. Christmas arrived with the particular efficiency of a deadline. Claire took 4 days off the first days she had taken since starting and spent them in Bridgeport with her mother. They watched films they had already seen and made food that required too many dishes and talked in the long, unhurried way that the absence of work makes possible. On Christmas Day, her mother was having a good day. The tremors quiet, the medication working cleanly, her eyes bright. They sat in the kitchen with coffee and the small Christmas tree that Patricia insisted on and that Claire had assembled on Christmas Eve with the same methodical care she brought to everything. You seem different, her mother said. I'm on vacation. You seem... Her mother studied her. Lighter. Claire looked at the Christmas tree. It was a modest tree by any standard, multicolored lights because Patricia believed strongly in multicolored lights, and the ornaments collected across 30 years, the ones Claire had made in grade school, the ones from vacations, the one shaped like a nurse that had been a joke gift from a friend that had become beloved. I told someone about Dad, Claire said. Her mother was very still. My employer, Claire said carefully. We were talking about something else and it came out that he had met Dad years ago. An encounter that... She stopped. She tried again. Dad sat with him in a hospital waiting room when he was very young and struggling. Just talked to him, just listened, the way Dad did. She looked at her mother. He said it changed his life. He said the company exists because of it. Patricia Hayes was quiet for a long moment. Her eyes went very bright. Oh? She said, softly. He's been trying to find out who Dad was for 22 years, Claire said. He never got a last name. Her mother pressed one hand to her mouth. Mom. No, I'm... She lowered her hand. Her eyes were wet, but her voice was steady. I'm all right. She looked at the tree, at the ornaments, at the one her husband had chosen at a fair the last Christmas before he died. He was always doing that, she said, sitting with people. He couldn't walk past someone who was struggling without... She stopped, breathed. He would have said it was nothing. I told him that. And He disagreed. Her mother smiled through the wet brightness of her eyes. He sounds like a good man, your employer. He is, Claire said. He really is. Her mother reached across the table. Her hand was shaking, and Claire took it in both of hers, and they sat in the kitchen with the small Christmas tree and the multicolored lights and the accumulated warmth of 30 years of difficult, beloved life. Your father saw him clearly, her mother said, from what you're describing. Yes. And someone, her mother looked at her. Someone is seeing you. Claire didn't answer. Her mother squeezed her hand. Outside Chicago was cold and still, and the streetlights made halos in the window frost, and somewhere across the city, a man who had built everything he had from an act of kindness by a man named Robert Hayes sat in a penthouse apartment and was, Claire hoped, less lonely than he had been in November. She would not know until January whether she was right. What she didn't know yet, what neither of them knew yet, was that Marcus Shaw had spent Christmas Day making phone calls and that January would require everything they had. Act 5. What was always there. The call from Marcus Shaw came on the second Monday of January, and he did not call Daniel. He called Claire. She was in the elevator alone 7:42 in the morning when her cell phone rang with a number she recognized from the November visit. She answered. Ms. Hayes, he said, I'd like to meet. Mr. Shaw, I'm sure I can find time in... Not in the building, he said. Not on any calendar, just the two of us. A pause. I think we can help each other. She kept her face composed, which was easy since she was alone in an elevator. I'm listening, she said. My brother is going to need to step back from day-to-day leadership of this company within the next 2 years, Marcus said. His condition will require it. That's a medical reality, not a judgment. And when that happens, this company needs to be led by someone who has been positioned correctly with board support, with operational continuity, with a transition that protects the Shaw name. A pause. You are clearly the most capable person in that office. I would like to discuss a role that reflects that capacity. And I would like your perspective on the timing of a transition that is ultimately inevitable. The elevator opened. Claire stepped out onto the 32nd floor. She stood in the lobby and looked at the limestone and the walnut desk and the young man in the charcoal suit, and she thought about several things simultaneously. Mr. Shaw, she said. Yes, I appreciate the call. I want to be direct with you about something. What you're describing, the timing of a leadership transition, the positioning of board support, a meeting off calendar, these are not things I can participate in. She paused. Not because I lack ambition, because I work for your brother, and what you're asking me to do is work against him while appearing to work for him. That's not something I'm able to do. Silence. I'm offering you a significant opportunity, he said. His voice had acquired an edge that the charm was having trouble covering. I know what you're offering, she said. My answer is no. Ms. Hayes, consider what you're... I've considered it, she said. My answer is no. I'm going to disclose this conversation to Mr. Shaw this morning. I wanted to tell you that in advance so you're not caught by surprise. A pause. Is there anything else? A long silence. No, Marcus said. The charm was entirely gone. What remained was something colder and more honest. Thank you for calling, she said and hung up. She stood in the lobby for exactly 3 seconds. Then she went to her desk and wrote a full account of the conversation from memory with timestamps while it was still completely precise in her mind. She printed 2 copies. She put one in the legal file. She knocked on Daniel's door. You have 20 minutes before your 8 o'clock, she said. I need 5 of them. He looked up from his desk. He read her expression. He had learned to read it, she knew, with the specific accuracy of someone who had been paying close attention, and he said, sit down. She sat. She handed him the document. She watched him read it. When he was done, he set it on his desk with a slow, careful movement. He called you, he said. He tried to recruit me to his timeline, and I declined as documented. I also disclosed it. She met his eyes. I want you to know that the disclosure wasn't strategic. It was because I told you at the beginning of all of this that you would have access to relevant information that I have. That's still true. He looked at her for a long moment. Did you think about it? He said. No, she said. Not for a moment. Why not? She held his gaze. Because you're not an obligation I manage, Daniel. You're a person She stopped, chose her words with precision. A person whose success matters to me, on its own terms, not as a mechanism for my advancement. The room was very quiet. Claire, he said. Don't, she said gently. We're in the office. We have an 8 o'clock. He was still for a moment. Then he reached across the desk and placed his hand over hers where it rested on the armrest for exactly 4 seconds, deliberate and warm and clear, and then he withdrew it. All right, he said, we have an 8 o'clock. Marcus made his final move on a Thursday, the 3rd week of January. He had it emerge spent the holiday period cultivating a different angle, not the shareholder proxy strategy, which was exhausted, but a media strategy. A financial journalist with a history of shareholder interest coverage received through an intermediary 2 steps removed from Marcus Shaw a tip about a senior executive at Shaw Industries managing a company despite a significant undisclosed medical condition affecting executive capacity. The journalist filed a FOIA request with the SEC regarding disclosure requirements. The request was a matter of public record. It surfaced on a Thursday morning at 9:42, and Claire found it at 9:48, and she was in Daniel's office at 9:50. He read the document. He was very still. This is the angle, he said. Yes. He's going to make it public. Not directly. He'll use the journalist as the vector. If it goes public with that framing, the board sees an executive who has concealed a material condition. The market assumes impaired judgment. The stock reacts. Marcus proposes an emergency leadership review. He has his transition. She paused. He doesn't need majority control if he has narrative control. Daniel looked at the window. The January lake was white around the edges where it had begun to freeze. The counter, he said. You make it public yourself, Claire said. On your terms, before he can frame it. He looked at her. A direct statement, she said. Not a press release, not through a communications team. You, in your own words. What the condition is, how long you've known how it's being managed, and this is the critical part why it doesn't affect your capacity to lead. She paused. And then you release the operational record, the Northgate acquisition, the Q3 results, the December board confidence vote. You make the case with evidence rather than defending against an accusation. Silence. You're asking me to disclose voluntarily, he said. I'm asking you to choose the shape of the truth rather than letting someone else choose it for you. He turned from the window. He looked at her for a long time. What about the board? He said. There are members who... I've already spoken to David Kim, she said. There's a legal framework that supports voluntary disclosure in circumstances where the condition doesn't materially affect executive function. We have documentation of function. The board confidence vote is part of the record. We're not in vulnerable territory unless we wait to be put there. You spoke to David Kim last night, after I saw the FOIA request surface in the preliminary public filings. She met his eyes steadily. I'm sorry I moved without asking. I should have woken you. No, he said. You were right to move. He looked at her with an expression she had seen before at the table in Minneapolis in the boardroom. Now here, the expression of a man recalibrating toward a reality that is better than his expectation. How did you find the FOIA in the preliminary filings? I set up an automated alert for any SEC filings referencing Shaw Industries in the relevant medical disclosure categories. 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks ago. I was tracking the Marcus situation. It seemed like an obvious vector. He laughed, a brief, genuine sound almost startled out of him. She raised her eyebrows. You are... He seemed to consider. You are extraordinary, so... he said, plainly, with the specific simplicity of a man who has decided to say the true thing instead of the managed thing. I'm thorough, she said. We need to move on the statement today. Yes, he said. Help me write it. They spent 3 hours on the statement. It was the most intimate professional work she had ever done, sitting across from him at the conference table with the draft between them, reading and revising her, saying this isn't right here, not because it's inaccurate, but because it sounds like a defense rather than a fact. And him going quiet and looking at the document and then revising it with the focused precision that was his most characteristic mode. The statement was 3 pages. It described the diagnosis clearly and without euphemism. It described the timeline of accommodation and adaptation. It described briefly and without drama that the condition affected certain visual functions and that those functions had been compensated for through the support of an excellent team and through specific operational adjustments that were documented and available. It described the operational record. It described the board's confidence. It did not apologize. One more thing, Claire said when they had finished the last revision. Yes, at the end. A personal note, not about the company. She met his eyes. about what this has meant, the experience of it, who you are in it, one paragraph, in your own voice. He looked at the document. He looked at her. That's not standard for a corporate disclosure, he said. You're not making a corporate disclosure, she said. You're a person telling the truth about your life. There's a difference. He was quiet. Then he wrote the last paragraph. She read it over his shoulder because she had moved around the table while they worked, and it felt natural to look at the document from the angle where she was standing. She read it, and it was the most honest thing she had ever seen someone write in a professional context, quiet and clear and completely without performance. The exact voice of a man who has decided to be visible. Yes, she said. That. He looked up at her from where he was sitting, and she was standing behind his shoulder, and they were very close, and the moment held for 2 full seconds in which neither of them was thinking about the statement. Then Daniel released it to Priya for distribution, and Priya sent it at 3 o'clock, and by 5 o'clock, it had been picked up by 4 major financial publications. And the story that emerged was not the story Marcus had been building. The story that emerged was CEO of Shaw Industries discloses. Progressive vision condition demonstrates strong operational record leads company through record acquisition quarter. Shaw Industries stock dipped 2% in after-hours trading and recovered to flat by 9 the next morning. Marcus Shaw did not comment publicly. He did the following Monday submit his resignation from the Shaw Industries board. The resignation was accepted. 3 days after the statement, Daniel Shaw asked Claire to dinner, not as a professional obligation. As a question direct and uncomplicated. I would like to take you to dinner, Friday evening, if you're free. Not as your employer, as, he paused, as a man who would like to have dinner with you. She said yes with the same economy of words. The restaurant was quiet and well lit and had the specific atmosphere of a place where people come to have conversations that matter. They did not talk about the company. They did not talk about Marcus or Sophia or board governance. They talked about her father and his early years and the books they both read and the way grief changes shape over time without ever becoming smaller. They talked about her mother's good days and bad days and the particular mathematics of loving someone through diminishment. He told her about his vision, not as a disclosure but as a conversation, the difference between what he could see and what he worked around and the things he was learning to let go. I was terrified of people knowing, he said. Not because of Marcus, before Marcus, just... He seemed to think about how to say it. It felt like the first thing you'd see when you looked at me. It wasn't, she said. I know that now. What was the first thing I saw? He considered. Someone who was compensating very carefully, he said, and doing it well. She smiled. I saw the whiteboard. He smiled back. You saw the whiteboard. And someone who was very good at his job, she said, and who had a strategic asymmetry he was managing that I wasn't going to involve myself in unless it became necessary. Until it became necessary. Until it became necessary. He looked at her across the table in the quiet restaurant. Your father sat with me in a waiting room when I was 22 and terrified, he said. And I went back to my work the next day, and I carried his voice with me for years. I kept thinking, what would he say about this decision, this risk, this moment? He paused. And all these years later, I hire his daughter, who is in ways that are not small very much her father's child. She felt the thing behind her eyes again. This time she let it be visible a little. He would have loved this story, she said. He had a very particular fondness for full circles. I'm glad to know that, Daniel said. He reached across the table and took her hand. Simple and direct the way he did everything when he was being fully himself. His hand was warm and sure, and she turned her palm up to meet it. I don't move quickly, she said. I want you to know that. Neither do I, he said. Not with things that matter. This matters, she said. Yes, he said. It does. They had dessert. They talked until the restaurant was nearly empty. He walked her to her car, and in the parking structure, in the ugly yellow light that is the least romantic lighting in human experience, he kissed her once carefully with the deliberate quality of a man who means it, and she kissed him back with her full attention, which was the most she knew how to give. But in February, Claire's mother had a difficult week. The medication protocol needed adjustment. 2 bad nights. A fall small and undignified in the kitchen, which required an ER visit and revealed nothing broken but frightened them both. Claire was at the hospital at 1 in the morning and texted Daniel a brief explanation of her absence from the early meetings. He responded, "Take all the time you need." Then an hour later, "Do you need anything?" She thought about the question. She typed, "No." Then she deleted it and typed, "Actually, yes." Could you find out if Dr. Anand Kapoor at Northwestern has availability this week? He's the Parkinson's specialist. I've been trying to get my mother into for 4 months. The wait list is currently 6 weeks. She hit send, then reconsidered immediately. He was a billionaire CEO with a board crisis and a public disclosure, and she had just asked him to help navigate a specialist wait list. His response came in 12 minutes, appointment scheduled for Thursday at 2. Dr. Kapoor's office will call in the morning. She sat in the hospital waiting room with her phone in her lap and felt something large and warm move through her chest. She typed, "You didn't have to do that." His response, "I know." She typed, "Thank you." He typed, "Tell her there's someone who wants to thank her husband for something that happened 22 years ago. She can take her time getting better first." Claire set the phone down in her lap. The hospital waiting room was white and fluorescent and smelled like all hospital waiting rooms, antiseptic and coffee, and the particular human smell of stress. She had been in rooms like this one before many times because care is largely made of waiting rooms. She had learned to find them bearable. This one felt different. This one felt like something had arrived in it that hadn't been there before. She picked up her phone and typed, "I'll tell her." She looked at the message for a moment. Then she added, "She's going to love you." His response took longer this time. When it came, it said, "I hope I get to deserve that." She pressed the phone briefly to her chest the way you do with things you're not ready to put down. Patricia Hayes met Daniel Shaw on a Saturday in late February in her kitchen in Bridgeport, which was the right place for this meeting because it was the place where things were real. Claire had made coffee, and her mother had made the apple cake she always made for significant occasions, which was a recipe from her own mother and which had a specific smell that was for Claire the smell of being home. Daniel arrived with no performance of his wealth or his stature. He arrived in jeans and a dark coat and the kind of quiet that belongs to someone who is nervous and not hiding it. He shook Patricia's hand. He looked at the kitchen the way people look at rooms that have been lived in, well with recognition, not assessment. Patricia poured him coffee and served him cake and looked at him across the kitchen table with her bright, still sharp eyes. "My daughter tells me," she said, "that you met my husband." "I did," he said. "Once. For 2 hours. It was enough to change the course of my life." Patricia's eyes went bright and wet in the way Claire knew well. "He was like that," she said. "He did that constantly. He didn't know he was doing it. He just thought he was talking to people." "He was," Daniel said. "He was also saving me. I don't think there's a contradiction." Patricia looked at him for a long time. Then she said, "What did he say to you, if you remember?" Daniel set down his coffee cup. He looked at Patricia Hayes with the full specific attention that was his most characteristic quality. "He asked me what I was building," he said, "and I told him. And he listened the way you listen when you're actually reorganizing what someone says as they say it. And then he said you have more than you think you have. And then he said," he paused, "the most important thing a person can do is see someone clearly, and to be seen clearly." Patricia pressed her lips together. "He said that," she said quietly, "all the time, in that order. See someone clearly. Be seen clearly." "I thought about it for 22 years, Daniel said. "I'm still thinking about it." Patricia looked at her daughter. Claire looked at her coffee. "I think," Patricia said, "that he would have liked you very much." She picked up her cake fork. "I think he would have said you were doing it right." Daniel looked at his hands for a moment. Then he looked up. "Thank you," he said. His voice was not quite steady. That means more than I can tell you." "Then you'll just have to keep showing up," Patricia said, with the brisk warmth of a woman who has been surviving difficult things for 30 years. "And eating the cake." He smiled. He ate the cake. He asked Patricia about herself, her career, her years at the hospital system, her memory of Robert Hayes as a colleague. And Patricia, who had not had occasion in a long time to tell someone about her husband who was actively interested, told stories for 45 minutes with the specific pleasure of someone whose grief is being given a place to become something else. Claire sat across the table and listened and looked at the two of them, the man her father had seen clearly, and the woman her father had loved, and felt the full circle complete itself in the quiet Bridgeport kitchen in the multicolored light winter afternoon. At the door as he was leaving, Daniel shook Patricia's hand and then, with the care of someone who is still learning what is natural, leaned in to kiss her cheek. Patricia patted his arm twice in the way of a woman who has decided someone is allowed in. In the parking space, he and Claire stood beside his car. "Your mother," he said. "She approved," Claire said. "She wouldn't have eaten the cake that fast if she hadn't approved." He laughed, the genuine version, the one that was brief and unguarded. He looked at her. The February sky was pale and vast, and the Bridgeport street was ordinary and entirely specific: the deli on the corner, the kids on the front stoop, the particular quality of light on a Saturday in winter. "I want to tell you something," he said. "All right." The company, the statement, the board situation, the Marcus thing, none of that is what this year has been for me. He looked at her steadily. The year has been you, meeting you, learning to be seen by someone who sees clearly, learning that being visible to someone isn't the same as being exposed. He paused. Learning the difference between being managed and being trusted. "That's a significant lesson," she said. "I had good instruction." She looked at him in the pale February light on the ordinary Bridgeport street where her father had once driven and her mother still lived, and the emergency cash was still taped behind the radiator, even though they no longer needed it. "I need you to know something too," she said. "Tell me." "I took this job because I needed the money," she said. "I want to be completely clear that that was true and that it's still true, and that I'm not embarrassed by it. The necessity is part of who I am. It's how I learned to be precise about what matters." "I know," he said. "And," she continued, "I am completely outside the necessity, committed to what is happening between us. Those two things don't contradict each other. I want you to have them both." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You sound like your father." She looked at the sidewalk. She looked up. "See someone clearly," she said. "Be seen clearly." "Yes," he said. He stepped forward and put his arms around her, which was a full and deliberate and unhurried gesture, and she put her head against his shoulder, which she had not let herself imagine doing until the moment she was doing it. And it was nothing like what she had imagined, because it was quieter and warmer and more real. They stood on the Bridgeport sidewalk in the pale February light, and the city went on being the city, and the full circle held.
밤 4시.
Epilogue. 9 months later.
다시 좋아.
October came back around and the lake turned the color. It turned in October. Gray-green and enormous, and the city prepared itself for winter with the characteristic combination of resignation and readiness. Claire's mother was having a good period. The medication protocol Dr. Kapoor had prescribed was working with considerably more consistency, and the aid now came 4 days a week, and the Bridgeport kitchen was still warm. Patricia had taken up watercolor painting, which she said was ridiculous and clearly loved, and the small canvases covered the walls above the emergency cash radiator with bright, enthusiastic color. Shaw Industries had completed 2 more acquisitions and had gone through the first quarter post-disclosure with a governance restructuring that brought 3 new independent board members and formalized the succession planning framework that had previously not existed. The stock was at a 17-month high. Daniel Shaw's condition was stable. His specialist was cautiously encouraged by the rate of progression, or rather the absence of it, over the prior 12 months. The central field held. He managed it with the specific practical adaptation that was consistent with his character, and he did not catastrophize it, and he did not diminish it. And Claire had learned to see it as simply part of him, part of the man who tilted documents toward good light, and chose the West Wing corridor, and had a driver named Robert who positioned the car at the right spot without being asked. They were careful at the office about what was visible. They maintained the professional clarity that the role required. Claire remained his executive assistant. She had been offered a directorial title, which she had declined because the role she actually occupied was more complex and more suited to her than any title currently in the org chart. And she had said so plainly, and Daniel had agreed, and they had negotiated a compensation structure that reflected it. She had paid down $80,000 of the medical debt. She would pay it all down. The number in her wallet had changed, and the paper was getting worn from looking at it. On a specific Saturday in October, Daniel Shaw brought Claire to the bench. It was not a famous bench. It was a park bench on the west side of Grant Park, in the section near the museum campus where the lake was visible, and the city was audible, and the October light fell through the trees in the particular way that makes people feel simultaneously small and at home. He had found it through a city records search. The bench had a small plaque installed years ago by a county hospital workers association with 12 names on it. One of the names was Robert M. Hayes. It was a recognition of long-term service installed 2 years before his death. It was not famous. It had no visitors. It sat in the park and received the weather and the changing light with the indifference of objects that don't know they are significant. Daniel found it because he had looked for it, because he had hired a researcher in April, and given her a specific brief, find any memorial or recognition associated with a hospital orderly named Robert Hayes, approximately 22 years of service to Cook County, who died approximately 17 years ago. The researcher had found the bench in 6 weeks. He brought Claire to it on a Saturday in October, and he told her what it was before they reached it, and she walked the last 30 feet in the way you walk when you are preparing to see something that matters. The plaque was small and weathered. She crouched down to read it and found her father's name in the list and put her fingers on it. The way people touch things they need to feel are real. She stayed that way for a long moment. Daniel stood behind her and said nothing because this was a silence that should not be filled. When she stood, her eyes were full. She did not try to manage it. "How did you find it?" she said. "I looked," he said simply. She looked at him. He was standing in the October park with the lake behind him and the city sounds around them and the specific quality of the light that makes Chicago in fall feel like an argument for being alive. And he was looking at her, not to her left, not with the slight compensation, but directly at her, because she was in his central field, and she had been for months now the thing he oriented toward. "Thank you," she said, "for looking. Your father looked for me," he said, "in a waiting room, when I was invisible." He held her gaze. It seemed right. She stepped forward. He opened his arms. She walked into them and stayed there in the October park in the sound of the lake and the city and cried without managing it, and he held her without managing it. And the bench with its small weathered plaque held all their names in the afternoon light. The most important thing a person can do is see someone clearly. Robert Hayes had known this. He had practiced it every day of his working life in waiting rooms and corridors and ordinary moments that cost nothing except attention. He had passed it to his daughter without naming it, and his daughter had carried it into a glass tower and applied it to a guarded, brilliant, struggling man who had been waiting without knowing it to be seen. This was his legacy, not the company, though the company was part of it, not the compensation or the title or the medical debt that was slowly resolving. The legacy was simpler and more durable than all of that. It was 2 people standing in a park in October holding on. It was the full circle. It was what he had done once in a waiting room without thinking about it. Seeing someone clearly and staying until the moment had given what it needed to give. He had done nothing extraordinary. He had done the most ordinary thing. He had paid attention. And it was enough. It was more than enough. It had been all along more than enough.